there is something quietly unsettling about the night. When the world goes still and the noise of the day fades into the background, your mind tends to drift backward. Toward old conversations, familiar faces, places you haven't visited in years. Memories surface the way dreams do, softly, without warning, with a strange sense of certainty that feels almost sacred. You don't question them. They feel like yours. They feel like you. But what if some of them were never real? Not in a frightening way, not in a way that should make you distrust yourself or feel broken. More in the way that a river is never quite the same river twice, always moving, always reshaping its own banks, always finding a new path while looking like it's standing still. Your memory is something like that river. It feels fixed and permanent like stone, but it is actually soft and responsive like water. And tonight, we're going to sit with that idea together. Slowly, gently. The way you sit with something that is both a little strange and deeply, quietly beautiful. Pour yourself something warm, get comfortable, let your shoulders drop. Because what we're about to explore isn't just neuroscience. It's something more personal than that. It's the story of how you became you, and why that story might be more fluid, more generous, and more forgiving than you ever thought possible. The night your brain first started telling stories. Long before you had words for your experiences, your brain was already working. Already sorting, already filing, already trying to make sense of the flood of sensation that comes with simply being alive. You were born into a world of light and sound and touch, and your mind, even then, even in those earliest days, was doing what it has always done, looking for patterns, looking for meaning, looking for the thread that holds things together. Memory in its earliest form isn't about facts, it's about feeling. Infants don't remember specific events, but they remember emotional textures, the warmth of being held, the anxiety of being alone, the relief of comfort arriving. These aren't stories yet. They're more like weather, atmospheric impressions of a world still being understood. As language arrives, something shifts. You begin to narrate your own life. You start putting events into sequence. This happened, and then this happened, and because of that, this happened next. The brain discovers cause and effect, and suddenly memory becomes a tool not just for survival but for identity. You are, for the first time, becoming a character in your own story. And here is where it gets interesting. Because the moment memory becomes narrative, it also becomes editable. Memory is not a camera. It never was. For most of human history, people imagined memory as a kind of storage system. A library, perhaps, a filing cabinet, a camera roll. You experience something, the experience gets stored somewhere inside you, and when you want to revisit it, you simply retrieve the file. Clean, intact, unchanged. Neuroscience has spent the last several decades quietly dismantling this idea. What researchers discovered, and what continues to surprise people when they first hear it, is that memory is not a retrieval process. It is a reconstruction process. Every single time you remember something, your brain is not playing back a recording. It is rebuilding the experience from scratch, using fragments, context clues, emotional residue, and perhaps most fascinatingly, whatever you currently believe to be true. Think about that for a moment. Every time you remember something, you are essentially writing a new draft of it. The hippocampus, a small curved structure deep in the brain, plays a central role in this process. It doesn't store memories the way a hard drive stores files. Instead, it acts more like an index, pointing to different areas of the brain where fragments of an experience live. The color of a room might live in one place, the sound of a voice in another, the emotion you were feeling in another place entirely. When you remember, the hippocampus gathers these fragments and assembles them into something coherent. But coherence is not the same as accuracy. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for reasoning, storytelling, and making sense of things, steps in to fill any gaps in that assembly. If a fragment is missing, it doesn't leave a blank space. It generates something plausible, something that fits, something that makes the story feel complete. Your brain is remarkably good at generating plausible details. So good, in fact, that you can't always tell the difference between a detail you actually experienced and one your brain quietly invented to keep the narrative whole. And then, when the memory is reassembled, it gets stored again. Not in its original form. In its newest form, complete with whatever changes just occurred during reconstruction. The next time you remember it, you'll be working from that version, the already edited one. This is sometimes called reconsolidation, and it means that the act of remembering is, itself, a gentle act of forgetting. Each time you revisit a memory, you are subtly rewriting it, not maliciously, not consciously, simply because that is how the brain works. The role of emotion in shaping what we remember. You might be wondering, surely emotional memories are different. Surely the things that really mattered, the moments that moved us, the experiences that left us shaking or laughing or weeping, surely those are stored more accurately. It's a reasonable assumption, and in some ways it contains a grain of truth. Emotion does strengthen memory. The amygdala, which processes emotional experience, works closely with the hippocampus. When something feels important, when it carries emotional weight, the brain flags it as worth keeping. This is why you remember where you were during significant life events, even decades later, while entire months of ordinary days have dissolved completely. But here is the quiet paradox. Emotion strengthens memory and distorts it. The more intensely you feel something, the more confident you become in your memory of it. But confidence and accuracy are not the same thing. Emotional arousal can sharpen certain details while blurring others. It can make a memory feel vivid and certain, even when the specifics have shifted significantly from what actually occurred. Think about a difficult conversation you had with someone you love. You remember it clearly, or you believe you do. You remember the words that were said, the tone, the feeling in the room, but the other person remembers it differently, just as clearly, just as certainly, and both of you are completely sincere. This isn't about lying. This isn't about one of you having a better memory than the other. It's about the fact that emotion colors the way information is encoded. And two people experiencing the same event through different emotional lenses will encode, and later reconstruct, two genuinely different versions of what happened. The Mandela Effect, when whole groups remember wrong. One of the most quietly wondrous things to emerge from public awareness of memory research is what has come to be called the Mandela Effect. The name comes from a striking phenomenon. Thousands of people around the world share a clear, vivid, confident memory of Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s. Many of them remember news coverage. Some remember memorial tributes. The memory feels specific and real. But Nelson Mandela did not die in prison in the 1980s. He was released in 1990, went on to become the president of South Africa, and died in 2013. This isn't a fringe confusion held by a handful of people. It's a shared false memory of remarkable scale. And it opened a door to something fascinating, the recognition that collective memory can be just as unreliable as individual memory. People have discovered similarly widespread false memories about all kinds of things, the exact wording of famous movie lines, the design of childhood brand logos, the details of well-known children's books. In each case, large numbers of people share the same specific, confident, wrong memory. Some people find this unsettling. Others find it almost comforting, a reminder that we are all in this together, all navigating the same beautiful, imperfect relationship with our own past. What the Mandela Effect reveals isn't alternate timelines or glitches in reality. It reveals the power of suggestion, the influence of social storytelling, and the way that shared narratives shape individual memory. When enough people around you believe something, when culture reinforces a particular version of events, your brain can quietly adopt that version as your own. Not because you're gullible, because you're human. Because your brain is a social organ, built to align with the world around it. Elizabeth Loftus and the Lost Child. No conversation about false memory would be complete without the work of psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, whose decades of research have gently and persistently challenged the idea that memory is a reliable record of truth. In one of her most well-known studies, participants were told, falsely, that they had gotten lost in a shopping mall as a child. They were given this suggestion through a family member and through repeated gentle encouragement to try to remember the event. What happened next is extraordinary. A significant number of participants not only began to believe the story, they began to remember it. They recalled the feeling of panic. They described the store they had wandered into. They talked about the kind stranger who helped them find their parents. They provided emotional, specific, sensory details about an event that had never happened. Their brains had taken a suggestion, found the emotional template of what getting lost feels like, and constructed an experience around it that felt entirely genuine. This isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of the brain doing exactly what it evolved to do, filling in gaps, constructing coherent narratives, and making meaning from incomplete information. The same capacity that creates false memories also allows us to imagine futures, to feel empathy for strangers, to lose ourselves in stories and music and art. It is the same beautiful mechanism, casting in different directions. But the implications are worth sitting with. If a suggestion given calmly and repeatedly can create a vivid, emotionally detailed memory of an event that never occurred, what does that mean for the memories we've carried for decades? The childhood stories told and retold at family dinners. The versions of ourselves we've accepted as fixed and true. The stories our families tell us. Here is something worth considering on a quiet night like this one. Many of your earliest memories may not be memories of events at all. They may be memories of stories about events. Your parents told you what happened. Your grandparents described what you were like. Photographs showed you moments you can now see but never actually consciously lived through as a remembering being. Over time, the story becomes the memory. The photograph becomes the feeling. The account becomes the experience. This is especially true for anything that happened before the age of about 3 or 4, the period psychologists refer to as childhood amnesia. The hippocampus is not fully developed during these early years, which means explicit autobiographical memories don't form reliably. And yet many people carry what feel like vivid memories from infancy. What they are carrying, most likely, is a reconstruction built much later, assembled from stories, photographs, and a deep desire to have a continuous, coherent sense of who they have always been. This isn't a flaw. It's deeply human. We need continuity. We need the feeling that there is a self that persists across time, that the child in the old photograph and the person sitting here tonight are connected by more than just biology. Memory creates that connection, even when, perhaps especially when, it is partly imagined. Why your brain edits the past. Your brain is not trying to record truth. Your brain is trying to keep you alive, functional, and coherent. And in service of that goal, it makes editorial decisions about your past with remarkable efficiency and almost no transparency. Consider what happens to painful memories over time. The sharp edges soften. The intensity diminishes. Details that were once vivid become hazy. This isn't a glitch, it's a protective feature. A brain that replayed trauma with perfect fidelity every time it was accessed would not be particularly compatible with moving through ordinary life. The softening is a kindness. But the same process works in the other direction too. Memories that support your current sense of self get reinforced. Memories that challenge it get quieter. If you believe yourself to be a caring person, your brain will tend to remember the moments that confirm that, and will reconstruct ambiguous moments in ways that align with the identity you carry. This is sometimes called motivated cognition in memory, the way our emotional needs and self-concept shape what we remember and how. It's not deception, it's adaptation. The brain is always trying to create a self that can function, that can face tomorrow, that can feel some sense of continuity and meaning in the face of constant change. But it does mean that the story you tell yourself about your past is, at least in part, a story about who you need to have been, not necessarily who you were. Memory, identity, and the story you live inside. This is where the science becomes something more personal, something that might feel, on a quiet night, like it touches on something you've always half known, but never quite put into words. If your memories are reconstructed, if they are constantly being edited and updated and shaped by who you are now, then what does that mean for your identity, for the story of your life? philosophers and psychologists have argued about the relationship between memory and identity for centuries. The philosopher John Locke suggested that personal identity is memory, that what makes you the same person across time is the psychological continuity provided by remembering your own past. If that's true, and if memory is reconstructed rather than retrieved, then identity itself becomes something more fluid than we tend to assume. You are not a fixed thing. You are a story in progress, a narrative that is always being revised in light of new experience, new understanding, new emotional needs. The version of yourself you remember from 10 years ago has already been quietly edited. The version you'll remember 10 years from now will be edited further still. Some people find this thought destabilizing, but try, if you can, to sit with a different feeling about it, the feeling of relief. If the past is not fixed, then you are not fixed. If memory is reconstructed, then old pain can be reconstructed too. The meaning you assign to something difficult, the interpretation you settled on in the immediate aftermath of something hard, that is not the final version. You are allowed to reinterpret. You are allowed to revise. You are allowed to find a different meaning in the same set of events, one that serves you better now than the original story did. Your brain is already doing this, whether you consciously participate or not. The only question is whether you want to bring some awareness to the process. Arguments and the people we love. One of the quietest and most useful applications of everything we've explored tonight is in the realm of personal conflict. Specifically, those arguments, and you know the ones, where both people are absolutely certain they are right about what happened, how it happened, and what it meant. These arguments have a particular texture. They feel less like disagreements and more like two realities colliding, because that is, in a sense, exactly what they are. When two people share an experience, they don't share a single unified memory of it. They share a moment, and then they each take that moment into their own separate minds, where it gets encoded through their individual emotional states, their particular histories, their existing beliefs about themselves and each other. From that point forward, the same event lives as two different events, one in each person's reconstructed memory. When you argue about the past with someone you love, you are not necessarily arguing about what actually happened. You are arguing about two different reconstructions of what happened, and both feel completely, undeniably real. Knowing this doesn't make conflict disappear, but it can change the emotional register of it. Instead of you're wrong and I'm right, there might be room for we remember this differently, and that's worth exploring. Instead of treating memory as evidence of truth, you might treat it as evidence of experience, of how something felt, of what it meant, of what mattered to each of you in the moment. This shift is small, but it can be quietly transformative. Social media and the curated past. We live now in a time when memory has an entirely new set of influences to contend with. The photographs you post, the captions you write, the stories you tell to an audience, all of these become part of the fabric from which your future memories will be reconstructed. When you filter a photograph, you are not just editing an image. You are nudging your own future memory of that moment toward something slightly warmer, slightly more golden, slightly more beautiful than the raw experience may have been. When you write a caption that frames an event in a particular way, that framing becomes part of how you'll remember it. This isn't inherently harmful. Stories have always been shaped by their telling, but it is worth being gentle with yourself about the gap between the curated version and the lived experience. The beautiful photograph of a holiday doesn't have to be the whole truth of that holiday. The polished story you tell doesn't have to erase the more complicated, more human version of events. Both can coexist, the edited version and the real one, the photograph and the moment, the story and the experience. Memory has always been curated, in its own way. Social media just made the curation visible. When false memory has serious consequences, it would be incomplete, in a conversation this honest, to spend all our time with the beautiful and philosophical dimensions of memory, without acknowledging that there are places where its unreliability carries genuine weight. Eyewitness testimony has long been considered among the most compelling forms of evidence in legal proceedings. Someone was there, they saw it, they remember. The conviction in their voice is unmistakable. And yet research has shown, again and again, that eyewitness testimony is among the least reliable forms of evidence we have. People misidentify strangers with complete sincerity. They remember details that never existed. They become more certain, not less, as time passes, even as their memories drift further from what actually occurred. This is not a criticism of the people involved. It is a recognition of how memory actually works, and how consequential the gap between confidence and accuracy can be when the stakes are high. The justice system is slowly, imperfectly grappling with these findings. More rigorous protocols for eyewitness identification. Greater skepticism of memory uncorroborated by other evidence. A growing recognition that confidence is not the same as truth. The lesson for all of us is the same. When we are most certain, it is worth pausing. Not to doubt ourselves into paralysis, but to hold our certainty gently, to leave room for the possibility that what we remember and what happened might not be perfectly aligned. The gift of intellectual humility. There is a practice that comes out of all of this that feels worth bringing into your life, not as a burden, but as a kind of lightness. Intellectual humility about memory is the simple willingness to say, I might be wrong about this, not as self-doubt, not as a surrender of your own perspective, but as a genuine openness to the possibility that your reconstruction of the past is one version among several, shaped by everything you are and everything you've been through. There are small, practical ways to support this. Writing things down shortly after they happen, before reconstruction has had much time to work on them. Staying open in conversations, especially difficult ones, to the other person's version of events. Noticing when you're retelling a story for the 100th time, and asking yourself whether the telling has added details the original event didn't quite have. But beyond the practical, there is something more spacious available here. A kind of compassion for yourself, and for everyone around you who is doing exactly the same thing, trying to hold their past together with the imperfect, creative, endlessly reconstructing tool of human memory. Nobody is walking around with a perfect record of their own life. Everyone is carrying a story that has been edited, softened, sharpened, colored by emotion, and shaped by need. Including you, including the people you're sometimes frustrated with, including the people who remember things differently than you do. This shared imperfection is not a problem to be solved. It is, perhaps, one of the most quietly humanizing things about us. The philosophical current running under all of this. On nights like this, when the mind is soft and the world is quiet, questions like these can open up in a way they don't quite manage during the busyness of the day. If your memories are reconstructed, then in what sense is your past self real? Not in a frightening way, more in the way that a river is real even though it is never still. More in the way that a flame is real even though its substance is constantly changing. Real but not fixed. Present but always in motion. The person you were at 7 years old exists in your memory, but your memory of them has been edited by every year that followed. The you at 23 lives in fragments, colored by everything you later came to understand. The you of last year is already being gently revised by who you are becoming now. This might feel like loss, but it can also feel like extraordinary permission. It means that the painful stories you tell about yourself are not law. They are drafts. The limitations you believe you've always had, the patterns you think are simply who you are, the wounds you assume are permanent fixtures of your inner landscape. All of these exist, at least in part, in the reconstructed memory that your brain has assembled and reassembled over years. They can be reassembled differently. Not through denial, not through forcing yourself to pretend the past was other than it was, but through the gentle, patient work of reinterpretation, of finding new meaning in old material, of allowing the story to breathe and shift as you grow and change. Your brain is already doing this. The question is whether you want to participate consciously, with some tenderness and some intention, in the editing of your own life story. Living gently, with an imperfect memory. As tonight moves deeper into quiet, as your breathing slows and the day finishes releasing its grip on you, There is something peaceful available in all of this. You don't have to get the past exactly right. You never could have. Nobody can. The memory you carry of your life is not a perfect record. It is something closer to a living portrait, painted and repainted over time, always becoming something slightly different, always reflecting not just where you've been, but where you are now and who you are in this moment. The people in your life who remember things differently than you do are not your adversaries. They are fellow travelers through the same imperfect landscape of human memory, doing their best with the same beautifully unreliable equipment. The stories you tell about yourself are not prison sentences. They are works in progress, subject to revision, open to reinterpretation, capable of becoming something more expansive and more kind than the early drafts allowed. Your past is not a fixed country you once lived in. It is more like a story you carry, one that you are always, whether you know it or not, still writing. And stories, unlike stone, can change. They can soften. They can open. They can find new meanings in old events, new light in rooms that once felt dark. They can release the weight of interpretations that no longer serve you and make room for something more honest, more generous, more free. A last thought before sleep. If there is one thing to carry with you into the quiet of tonight, let it be this. The fact that memory reconstructs rather than replays is not a design flaw. It is the brain's way of keeping you present, adaptive, and alive. It is what allows you to heal. It is what allows you to grow. It is what makes it possible for experience to genuinely change you, rather than simply leaving a fixed record that you carry unchanged forever. The version of yourself you remember is not the only true version. The story you've told about your life is not the only possible story. The meaning you've made from your past is not the only meaning available. And somewhere in that recognition, there is a quiet kind of freedom. The night is deep now. The world outside is soft. Let your mind rest from the work of remembering, from the constant, gentle, creative labor of reconstructing a self out of fragments and feeling, and the ongoing story of a life. You are not your memories. You are something more fluid, more alive, more open to revision than that. And that, when you settle into it, is a rather beautiful thing to be. Rest well,